There is a war in America. This is War in America, and I'm your host, Jonathan Warren. Today is October 3rd, 2025. It's Friday. A lot of stuff going on in the news, a lot of stuff going on in the world, and we'll get right into it. Today is day 3 of federal government shutdown. Congress is still getting paid. They took yesterday off for Yom Kippur. And there's negotiations ongoing. Trump has shared a picture of Hakeem Jeffries in a sombrero. That's the kind of state of affairs. I don't think it's really a serious thing. People are not getting paid. People are being furloughed. Military members, I don't believe, are getting paid. But yet, there's time to make jokes, I suppose. The budget chief, Russ Vought, is making cuts. This shutdown gives leverage to Trump and the ability for him to decide more or less what he thinks is essential and cut accordingly. He's able to really cut off funding to a lot of these agencies that he views as Democrat agencies. So it's really backfiring for the Democrats. They really didn't seem to think this through. They gave him the ability and the power to wield, the purse. And, I don't see this lasting very long. It looks like by Friday it'll be wrapped up. Looks like a lot of Democrats are already caving. The central issue seems to be the Obamacare subsidies. And, the narrative among the right is that it's funding illegal immigrants. There's a little truth to that, but it really seems to be more about just trying to gut Obamacare itself. There's like some indirect, like emergency Medicaid funding that does end up going to illegal immigrants. They say about $500 million or so. Now, that's a lot of money. It may not be a lot in the grand scheme of the budget, but still, I think anything is too much at this point when we are $38 trillion in debt, or we will be in like a month or two. I think it's like 37.8 right now. Pretty ugly. So, it's probably a positive development that the ACA is getting gutted. Rand Paul has been a staunch fiscal conservative. He's been really consistent for years now, years and years, decades even. And, he took on this goal and platform, under the direction of his father, the great Ron Paul, who was my inspiration and many others to even, be red-pilled, as they say, and to even have an interest in politics or even hope for the future of this country, for that matter, because his policies seem to be the only ones that would circumvent and avoid these kinds of situations that we find ourselves in every few months, where, potential shutdowns, midnight, looming deadlines, and just disarray and dysfunction. But it looks like this shutdown is being used obviously politically, and it seems like it's backfiring on the Democrats, specifically with the label Schumer shutdown. I've seen that a lot, so there seems to be a lot of blame being placed on Chuck Schumer himself. But again, it looks like they're caving. It looks like government will reopen. But one has to wonder if there's ulterior motives. And personally, I really think that it's likely that this is just an effort to delay the Epstein release, the Epstein files release, because a lot of the donors, donate to both sides and prop up both sides of the political parties and political aisle. So could just be that. War is still imminent on the horizon. Trump ran on no new wars. Looks like that was a bunch of bullshit. Venezuela has been, surrounded by 8 battleships. They say the total amount of U.S. military personnel is totaling 6,500. So 6,500. They said that there's F-35s on many of these boats and drones as well. So that's not good. They're continuing to strike little dinghy boats, allegedly transporting narcotics or drugs or whatever, they're saying, drug trafficking. but who even knows if this is the case? And furthermore, it looks like it's just a pretext for war. You know, China has aligned itself, Russia has aligned itself with Venezuela. Obviously, there was a lot of questions in their last election as to whether it was legitimate or not. Doesn't really look like it. Looks like Maduro is a dictator who is, kind of ignoring the will of the people. Fair enough. But again, we don't really have the money to be doing wars, and we don't really want to entangle ourselves in these quagmires anymore. And furthermore, Venezuela is the largest oil reserve in the world, and they have a lot of gold, they have a lot of copper, so it seems like, it's resource oriented, and we do not want, China to kind of elbow their way in this side of the hemisphere of the globe. And, Maduro's I'm no fan of Maduro. He's not the best guy, obviously, but this is just really allowing him to consolidate power, it seems, and it seems like he's building up for and expects a war soon. He has 250,000 troops stationed along the coast, is what I've read, which is not a small number. And, I've seen a lot of things that are saying that airstrikes are coming next, and possibly even a land invasion. So not good. But then we have Iran. Iran, on the other hand, there's that security deal, that trilateral security deal with Israel and Qatar and the United States. Obviously, there's a lot of suspicion between Qatar and Israel. However, they are both enemies of Iran. Iran being a Shia majority Muslim country, and Qatar being a Sunni Muslim country, and they've always, kind of been at odds. So this security deal that was signed looks to be a way to allow Israeli cooperation in a military operation that seems to be coming soon. I've already seen that many foreign and former Israeli officials are sitting here saying that they believe that Iran is building up for a military strike on Israel, which is ridiculous. They have shown to be quite rational, and they have really resisted and held back when it comes to retaliating. It just looks like this is a bunch of bullshit. It looks like they're about to attack Iran. It looks like we're about to attack Iran. I've seen military equipment being shipped over there. Our refueler planes are being shipped over there. And it just seems like we're just trying to get Israel to do it for us. Obviously, this is about regime change, and they're attacking the Ayatollah. They claim that the nukes and the uranium is still a threat. You're sitting here seeing Benjamin Netanyahu say things like, oh, we never really thought that we were going to get the nukes in the first place, and we knew that. It was like, okay, well, that was the whole story. That was the whole plan. Obviously, that was bullshit, It just looks like they're adamant to kind of do what's called a decapitation strike and take out the leadership and a lot of their military infrastructure on Iran. It looks like the window for regime change is closing. They're closely aligned with Russia and China. Same thing with Venezuela. So it just looks like the lines for World War III are being drawn. Putin made some comments, about Ukraine, and we'll get to that. There's reports that Trump is supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles, which would have to be operated by U.S. officials. So it looks like we're getting more directly linked to an attack on Russia, directly from the United States, which is a terrible idea because they have a bunch of nukes. But Putin has been really, reasonable, it seems like, when he speaks in public. He doesn't seem to really want this to escalate. He seems to, mock the idea that he's playing, brinkmanship and violating airspace. So, one has to wonder if all these reports of like drones and jets and violations of airspace is legitimate, and one has to wonder if this is just saber rattling or whether it's actual escalation. So a lot of questions there. Not really sure, which way it's going to go, but it looks like it's heading south. Trump, he said that he is okay with regime change in Russia, and he actually said he's okay with Ukraine pushing into Russia. He's kind of blaming Russia at this point. And obviously, he has obligations to NATO, and we've already put in, I think, $300 billion into this. So there's a lot of sentiments that we don't want to waste all that, and that Russia isn't doing as well as, they're presenting themselves. But it's just obvious that battle lines are being drawn. And it looks like the battle is for, a world war. It has the potential for that. It looks like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and then India's on the fence. They kind of play both sides. But all these big countries are kind of aligning against us. And we are allied, with who we are allied with, which is Israel and Europe and some of Central America. But I mean, the question of whether or not we have the military capacity to take all these foes on at once comes into doubt when you really see the extent to which we've kind of split the world up into these two spheres. So obviously we pray for peace. We hope peace is possible, but it's not looking like it. It looks like everything's escalating. It looks like everything's getting ugly. And you just really hope that that's not the case. Another escalation was France seized a Russian oil tanker. And, Putin responded pretty calmly to this. He just said, we're always chastised and mocked and talked down to that we should be following international law and this and that. He's like, well, I would do the same to you in this case. I really would hope that you guys would follow international law. So I don't know. I mean, that seems to be a pretty big escalation. It was a pretty large oil tanker. It was obviously trying to be provocative, as the book behind me says. There is a sentiment that Russia was provoked into this by many people, and many people did not want, to further this conflict. They wanted to negotiate, and Trump ran on that, but it looks like he went back on that entirely, and here we are. It looks like he's just dead set on kind of escalating this and making this situation worse. And we see that all these old, they started drafting old men from Ukraine, and I'm seeing like all these images of elderly people sitting and being rallied together and being training and stuff. And that's just sad to see, because it's a meat grinder. It's a drone war. It's really just a experiment and a pretext for what's to come. It really looks like this is, Ukraine's final push, and they're running out of men. You're seeing people grabbed off the street. You're seeing them screaming, kicking and screaming, being thrown into vans. And that's just horrible to see, because, a lot of these people are going to die. And the way they die is very brutal and inhumane, with just like a remote controlled fucking flying toy essentially coming up to them and blowing up. It's not a fun war to be in at all. I mean, there's no really fun wars, but this one in particular is just dark. It just really reaches the limits of evil and the darkness of human imagination. Man-made horrors beyond my wildest imagination, is the phrase. And I think we're really seeing that in this conflict. I really hope that, somebody is willing to give and take here, because it seems like everybody's dug in. France is, building emergency hospitals. I'm seeing that Macron is building like this giant bunker for himself. But the common person is screwed here. The people of Europe are screwed. They've already been hurting for a long time just because of, their fuel reliance on Russia, and they're just living without at this point. And what's the, point of all this? A little bit of land that's now kind of just wasteland at this point? I don't know. Resources, it seems to be obviously a proxy war between, United States and Russia, and Europe and Russia. But I just hope we find a solution to that soon, because it's not a good thing. So the flotilla toward Gaza got intercepted by Israel's Navy. Greta Thunberg, I think I said her name right, was arrested and deported again. It's not happened more than once. But this time, protests broke out worldwide. There was a massive strike in Italy, the nation's largest union. Staged walkouts and marches and things like that. And Italy's prime minister, she said that this is just, political or whatever, but at the same time, she's calling for sanctions against Israel. So it seems to be that she's willing to entertain, the idea of pushback against Israel. And it seems like the people of, Europe are definitely leaning in that direction. It seems like the leaders are just a step behind him, obviously. But I saw that Colombia, the country of Colombia, expelled their Israeli diplomats. And there's been some strong statements from the prime minister of Colombia. He, was really vocal when he was at the UN General Assembly last week. And he was really outspoken about his distaste for the Israeli government and what they're doing in Gaza. And I think as a result, we withdrew his visa and kicked him out of the country. But this is a country that we cooperate with in a lot of different ways when it comes to like drug enforcement and things like that. So you got to really wonder if we're turning Colombia against us too. And they blamed us in a statement that we are supporting the genocide, which we are. So it looks like after Venezuela, Colombia might be next. And that's just sad to see, because these are people who historically we've worked with, and we're really just sacrificing our friends and our personal interests, our national interest and on the behalf of Israel at our expense. We're really using our reputation, our trade leverage, our historical ties. All of this is going to the wayside and being sacrificed for Israel's sake. And it's just, this is a resounding and repetitive theme here, obviously. But this is global. Everybody's kind of saying these things. I hear all the time, oh, you're just so focused on Israel. Why are you upset with Israel? It's like, it's not me. This is clearly the center point and the focal point of, all the conflict, or the majority of conflict in the world. And I just think that this, is the center of attention at this point, because it just seems like it's getting worse and worse. And we really are hurting ourselves by even being involved in the first place. And it just doesn't really make any sense to do so. But the big news is, Trump proposed this peace plan, and some things were okay, some things weren't, in my opinion. Excuse me. For instance, the aid to Gaza sounded good. The IDF leaving, the hostages exchanged, all of those sound great. The only thing that doesn't sound great and doesn't sound acceptable is the idea that they should completely demilitarize and disarm themselves. And I don't think that's a smart move at all. I don't think they could trust the Israeli government. I think they're just going to use that as a way to completely finish the job of, as they say, of ethnically cleansing this strip of land. And I just would not agree to that if I were them, unless Israel is going to, disarm and demilitarize as well, which they never will, So that is really, I think, the hang up here. And also, they did agree to relinquish control and even allow like whatever was in the peace proposal of essentially letting, I don't know, a council or whatever that has Palestinian leaders in it administer the land for a few years or whatever. So I don't know. I think that Hamas has gotten smarter about their, public relations and their diplomacy. They're really kind of taking away the excuse that Israel's been using this whole time, which is the hostages. It's like, as soon as they don't have the hostages to use as an excuse to murder all these children, then at that point it's like, what is left to defend it? Why would you defend it any longer? Because they're going to be like, oh, because they're resisting occupation. And it's like, well, yeah, anybody would do that. So, I mean, it's going to be hard for them. And I think they've intentionally kind of sabotaged their own hostage negotiations at the expense of the hostages, which is horrible. Many of the hostages' families I've seen have said that very thing and been very upset about that. But I think it would be such a good thing if they exchange the hostages and they don't have that to use anymore. I think that is the first and foremost thing that they've got to do. And it looks like they'll be getting a lot of hostages in return, but nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about Israel's hostages and how many hostages they have and how many hostages that they've, children and had on like administrative detention or whatever they call it, which is where they don't charge them and they just hold them indefinitely. And, there's reports of torture and reports of sexual abuse, and there's really no recourse for them. There's no justice, there's no transparency, and there's no oversight. So it really looks like it's going to be a good thing if these hostages do get returned and exchanged, because again, they won't be able to use that as an excuse any longer. And we're sitting here seeing, there was a synagogue attack in the UK. This guy was wielding a knife. The police show up. They shoot innocent people, is what I'm reading. They actually killed somebody innocent. They're framing it as, it was an accident or whatever, but they're not really giving the police a hard time about it. But this whole idea, somebody's going to go into a synagogue and stab people, it's a horrible thing. And it just speaks to the level of which that Israel has put Jews around the world in harm's way. They've hid behind Judaism. And it's really put targets on the back of people who have nothing to do with this conflict at all. And I just hate that we're seeing, them being targeted instead of the state of Israel, who is actually responsible for all this stuff. Like, I highly doubt the people that were targeted at the synagogue in the UK had anything to do with this ethnic cleansing at all in Gaza and these land grabs in the West Bank. It just, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not a smart move or a just move to kind of target civilians in any case. That's terrorism on both sides. Like, it seems like the Israelis are targeting innocent people and civilians, and then in return, other civilians and innocent people are being targeted. But it's just like, I really wish that the people responsible were actually having to face consequences for what they're doing. And a lot of countries have called for Netanyahu's arrest. I think Belgium and maybe France and countries like that have said they will actually arrest him. I think Spain, and put him in the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, where he would face charges of genocide and ethnic cleansing and mass murder. But would that actually happen? Is that actually feasible? Is that possible? Probably not. But I really just, feel bad for the people who are targets that really have nothing to do with it. Because this is like, the journalists being targeted by ISIS, the American journalists. And, I bring this point up a lot, that during, the Afghanistan-Iraq wars, many Americans were opposed to it. However, all Americans were being held accountable for it, but we didn't really have much control over our government. I feel the same way about, the diaspora of Jews around the world. They don't really have a say in this. They don't really have control over it. So it doesn't really make sense to attack those people. It just kind of gives the Israeli government like a PR thing, that, this victimhood claim that they constantly make. It just gives them the ability to make that argument and be like, look, now we have to kill more people because we're being attacked. And, which, again, these people who were attacked had nothing to do with it. And it's the Israeli government doing it, not the people. There is a significant minority of even Israelis who are opposed to what's going on in Israel. Now, there is a significant majority who is okay with it, but it's just really hard to just, paint everybody with the same brush. I think that's what, the Zionists do. I think this is what makes them so evil and so wrong in the first place, is because they just put all the Arabs and Muslims in one box and just say, hey, kill them all. You see Laura Loomer sitting here justifying women and children being killed as enemy combatants. And that's just insane. It's demonic. It's evil. And it's inhumane. So we just can't tolerate that kind of thing. We can't allow that. We can't, allow ourselves to become monsters just because we're trying to destroy monsters, So I just don't want to end up like them, more or less. Theo Von, he had made a statement that, he was trying not to take his own life after a show that didn't go well or whatever. And I actually reached out to him. I was like, hey, man, keep your head up. Everything's going to be fine. And he made some statements that, like, I'm not really going to take my own life. And the only reason I bring this up is because he was like, hear that, Israel? So, which is hilarious, but also serious. Also serious because he has been outspoken about, free Palestine and stopping ethnic cleansing in Gaza. He refers it to a genocide. I think ethnic cleansing is more accurate, but there's an argument there, and I definitely hear that, and I definitely respect that, and they have some good points. So it's just funny and also kind of scary that he's like having to say, I'm not suicidal, I'm not going to kill myself, Israel, just in case he gets Epstein or whatever. We know that he didn't do it himself. He's talking about how happy he is and how much he loves everything, whatever. Which brings us to the TikTok and X censorship. So TikTok got completely dominated by Larry Ellison under the pretext that it was under the CCP control, the Chinese Communist Party. They said there was a lot of propaganda being implemented on America and that they were spying on us with it and stealing our data, whatever. But obviously, after they took it over, it was a complete crackdown on anything anti-Israel. You can type in evil Christian, you can type in evil Muslim, everything will pop up. You type in evil Jew, it'll automatically take it off. People who have been critical of Israel, and that there was much of that on TikTok, have been completely removed, completely deplatformed. And, so TikTok is gone, as I say, RIP TikTok. However, Bibi Netanyahu said that was the first phase of this eighth front, which is, social media and the PR. And the second phase would be X, which is, formerly known as Twitter. And this is one that I'm very active on in the last, 11 months or so. I made an account, and it's been, awesome because you speak to celebrities, you speak to your leaders, you speak to people you disagree with. And on the appearance, it did initially seem like a true platform for free speech. They were allowing, Nick Fuentes to come back, Gavin McInnes, Alex Jones, Trump came back. All these people that got banned when it was known as Twitter are now back. But now you're seeing this crackdown. I've seen a lot of blue check marks taken away. I saw the uncensored AI got their gold check mark taken away, which is literally $5,000 a month. So we're really seeing a crackdown. I got a hateful conduct or something, hateful speech, like notice on one of my things for quoting the Bible about the synagogue of Satan and things like that. Apparently that's been going on for a while. People are telling me in the comments. So it's really a sad state of affairs, and the last and only platform we have to really speak our minds and have open and free dialogue and debate is now looking like it's being censored. They completely neutered and handicapped the Grok AI. As we all know, a few months ago, it was, going full Nazi and saying, it was calling itself Mecha Hitler, and things like that, which, like a mechanical Hitler. But it will, call Israel's, I guess, policies a genocide. However, it also defends it and says it's controversial. I definitely have been getting shadow banned just for, saying things like, hey, maybe you should stop murdering children to like people, like Laura Loomer and people like that. I mean, I'm blocked by her now at this point, but there's still people, if you say that, you will notice that your like viewership goes way down, engagement goes way down. And, somebody said today, this post, this guy who follows me, Jack Durden, he was like, don't stop, after I posted about being shadow banned. And I'm like, man, I'll scream into the abyss if I have to. Like, this is not going to stop me. I do this for, fun at this point. And, I've been accused of being paid by Iran and Qatar, which is insane. Which, by the way, if somebody's paying me to do something I was going to do anyways, like, it'd be stupid to say no. But regardless, I don't do this, for money. I don't do this for a job. This is just a hobby on the side, more or less. And, not even a hobby. It's just really, I feel like a duty. I feel like we really need to focus on our country. We need to take our country back. We don't have sovereignty of our own nation. And that is something that is just a disgrace at this point. We've got to take our fucking country back. We've got to have the right to be represented, And it's like our taxation is being sent to Israel, and it's like no taxation without representation, buddy. This was an original mantra that we lived by and that this country was founded on. And yet here we are, and that, on the lands that our fathers conquered, and we're completely incapable of even criticizing a foreign government. That's the point. That is too far. And we've got to fight back and push back against the censorship. We've got to speak out and really, dig on our heels and sit here and say that this is not okay. X is the last place that we can speak freely. This is the last place we can have open and honest dialogue and really control the narrative of our own country. The media has been so subverted and so infiltrated by foreign interests and corporate interests and wealthy interests and all these things. But then the common man, the average citizen, can go on X and really becomes, a huge mouthpiece, a huge megaphone for the truth. And now that's being threatened. I don't really trust Elon Musk for sure. He seems to be controlled in some way. He was actually criticizing Israel early on, and then he stopped all of a sudden. He made the trip. He got the call, as they say. And then now, here, lo and behold, X is now cracking down on censorship. And this was the whole reason he bought it, allegedly. This was supposed to be the whole point. But really, one has to question, it's like, was it really just about getting user data and mass surveillance, and really a propaganda outlet for him, maybe, because as soon as you sign up on X, then, you're following Elon Musk. He probably has more followers than anybody, obviously, for that reason. And it's just a shame to see. I really hope that the state of affairs does not go in that direction. And even though it may have been going on for a long time, I just really hope that we can retain this one last bastion of freedom. There's not many left. It seems like the end is near as far as liberty seems to be on the way out, and I just am really fearful for that. We've got to fight for our rights, got to fight for our freedom. As Thomas Jefferson said, the blood or the tree of liberty is like quenched, and fed by the blood of tyrants and patriots. So I don't know the exact quote, that was a paraphrase, but at any point, the point is still there. The message is still there. Like, we have to constantly struggle with tyrants and tyranny and those that would enslave us. If we're not already there, we got to keep fighting just as long as we can open our mouths. It's much better to live on your feet than die on your knees. And so I did it the other way around. It's much better to die on your feet than live on your knees. Yeah, that's what I mean to say. Because, I'm just somebody who has a big mouth. I can't really stop, and ignore the state of affairs. I'm getting a lot of pushback finally, which, I expected. I expected if I was consistent in this. I expected if I stayed at it and spoke my mind and encourage everyone to do so, that there would be a backlash of some kind, that there would be, people kind of targeting me. And there's this one guy in particular who's just literally like, he'll randomly pop up on my posts and just talk shit. And it's just like, man, this is getting creepy. Like, why are you obsessed with me, man? He has like 15,000 followers, but yet he's focused on me, and it's so weird, so creepy, so bizarre. And, I'm flattered or whatever, but I'm just like, why are you even paying attention to me? Why, I have like, 900 followers, 800 followers. I'm not there yet, but slowly but surely we're gaining traction and we're getting louder and louder. And I think they know that. So they're trying to nip us in the bud. They're trying to target people who are, relatively small in the sphere so far, but they don't want, it to get any bigger. They don't want the problem to get any worse. And they seem to be kind of ignoring the issue. And then yet now that they're actually focused on it, it's too late. The cat's out of the bag. The younger generation has already gone on the wayside. And it's like, they're losing everybody at this point. All conservatives are kind of turning on them. There's like a split between MAGA and America First. And America First is having more credibility and more support at this point. It seems like there's a lot of support for, this country to be represented by the people instead of foreign interests in foreign countries. So I just really hope that Musk doesn't cave entirely and turn into TikTok. So that's just not a good development, but I just hope that, we keep fighting and it stays free. So there were some emails leaked that showed that Marco Rubio, when he ran for president, I think 2018 or something like that. I don't remember if he ran in 2018 or not, but regardless, he was vetted. He was vetted by Larry Ellison, the guy who's off and on the richest man in the world, the guy who took over TikTok. He has like all these other media platforms. He has Oracle. He was like affiliated with the CIA. He's one of the biggest supporters, if not the biggest supporter of the Israeli military and the state of Israel. So he was vetted by Marco Rubio to see how favorable Marco Rubio was toward Israel. And it turns out that he's clearly willing to do anything that they want. He's deported people, he's taken back visas, he's cracked down on free speech, all for the sake of Israel. And I've heard that he's one of the biggest proponents of war with Venezuela. So he's a bad actor. We can't trust Marco Rubio. I mean, I'm hearing him floated around for potential president or vice president in the next cycle, which is not too far away. It was like we got 3 years left, right, before we're on the cusp of a next presidential election. And it looks like he is getting ready for that and wants his name in the hat, wants to throw his name in. And he was vetted by somebody who is, clearly putting another country's interest ahead of our own, a very powerful, rich person, Larry Ellison. So these emails that he was being vetted and that he passed the test really are concerning and just shows that we can't trust Marco Rubio. Ted Cruz, we know he's openly pro-Zionist and pro-Israel. He says he wants to be the biggest supporter of Israel in Congress, which you're an American citizen, you're a Texas senator for that matter. He's my senator. It's just like, what a fucking disgrace. But he was like going on this rant about how we need to stop attacking pedophiles, is what he said. He said, let's stop attacking pedophiles. Now, obviously he misspoke, but I think it was a Freudian slip, as they say. It sounds like he was saying what he actually felt and not what he actually meant to say, which is, it's interesting because one of my pastimes is going through the elected leaders who are clearly protecting the Epstein clients and calling them pedophile protectors. So his whole statement on this is just hilarious at this point. He's just like, oh, pedophile, we need to stop attacking pedophiles. It speaks to how disgusting these people are, how we have got to get them out of office one way or the other. But I mean, voting them out. Like, we've got to vote them out, whether it's the primary or the general election. At this point, I don't even care if it's a Democrat, as long as it's somebody who represents the people and the Americans. As long as you're not sacrificing Americans for a foreign interest, then you're good for me. You're better than what we had. It's an improvement. It's progress, right? So I just really think that was interesting. I just wanted to talk about that for a second. And then I also read that Tucker Carlson had revealed that IDF soldiers were barging into meetings and making demands during the 12-day war with Iran back in June. And again, it just speaks to the level of infiltration and occupation and subversion that we are facing from this foreign government. I think sovereignty of our country and representation of our people is something that can really unite the whole country. I think the whole country can get behind that sentiment. I am seeing that. I'm seeing the Young Turks and Con Inc. kind of, conservative Inc. they call it, like the mainstream influencers kind of get together on this one issue, and that's really inspiring to see. But I guarantee it, terrifies Israel. They're paying these influencers $7,000 each post. They're really rallying up small-time influencers just to get as many people as they can, because these big names are kind of all turned on them at this point. They don't really have anybody left. So that's a positive development, but I mean, it's just shameful that our military is that controlled by somebody else, different country. Really puts a target on our backs. It makes us vulnerable to attacks, and it just really weakens our national defense, because the American land and mainland isn't even the fucking focus. It's not the priority of our military, and that's just horrible to see. Um, the ADL, I talked about that a little bit the other day on Wednesday. The Anti-Defamation League, I was kind of doing a follow up on that and just looking into the backlash that they've received. They took down their glossary of hatred and extremism or whatever it was. They had targeted Turning Point. They had promoted Antifa. They had targeted Christian Identity. They had ties with the FBI going back for decades. They had targeted students who spoke out against Israel and pro-Palestine protests. And now you're sitting here seeing them completely fall apart and everybody turning on them. Looks like, a lot of their membership is completely declined and completely gone. It looks like they're going to disband and rebrand at some point. And that just looks like the direction it's going in. But I'm also seeing that the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is more or less the same thing, is also being targeted. Musk was talking shit about it. Like, all these people are really rallying against these organizations that are anti-American and promoting foreign interests. So that's a positive development. I mean, it's good to see. And then, when those paid influencers are paying like $7,000 or whatever, I saw that Marjorie Taylor Greene is now calling on them to register as a foreign agent under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, as is the law. But it looks like, I don't know if they'll actually do it or not. The ones that are being paid $7,000 per post, and the posts are horrible. They're super cringy. They're super embarrassing. I would be embarrassed to have anything to do with that. But you're seeing in their comments, every time they do post something that's positive toward Israel, they're getting ridiculed. The comments are hilarious. You're seeing that people are just mocking them and laughing at them and just sitting here saying that, oh, $7,000 in your account, here you go. And then, the response is like, oh, how original. But it's just like, it's true. We all know it's true. We know you're working for foreign governments. Marjorie Taylor Greene actually said that she thinks that they should have some other colored check mark or something by their name to even highlight who they are and what they stand for. I think that's a great idea. And I really like her. She's come a long way. She was kind of ridiculous there at times, but I really think she was misunderstood. I think she was just kind of finding her place and finding her platform and really just cementing her views. I think she's a good leader. I would not be surprised if she runs for president, and she might have my vote. I mean, honestly, if anybody's going to be the first woman president, it should be her, not AOC or somebody like that. So, which it looks like she's about to run too. Which that's going to be a disaster, right? They're going to shove it down our throats. They're going to force it on us. And obviously, her and Sanders have been on like this nationwide tour. I don't even remember what it was called, but it was just on private jets, preaching socialism. It's a joke. It's a joke. They're, covering for Israel up to this point. They finally started turning on them, but up to this point, they were basically covering for Israel entirely. And, it's just all fake. You can't trust these people. So I would much rather MTG for president, for sure. And I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of people consider that. I'm seeing her consider that. Even there was a trip she made to New Hampshire that was speculative, that she's just kind of getting her foot in the water and see how it is, see how much support she has. And I think that would be a really positive thing. But she's been on the side. She's been on the right side. Almost all these issues in the last year, as far as I know. She's really been good on the Epstein files. She's been consistent on that. She's been good on cutting spending. She did vote for the CR, but I kind of understand why at this point, because it looks like we're still just trying to get a Democrat versus Republican thing. She doesn't want to completely alienate her party, especially if she's going to try to run for president. But I don't know. She's been consistent. She spoke out against it either way. So this Israel issue, she's been 100% on. Been really good about it, and she got a target on her back now, like they all do. But we only have a few good politicians that actually represent us, so we really got to stand behind them, and give them support. Like Thomas Massey, Rand Paul, and, MTG, and that's pretty much it. So that's what we're kind of, left with out of 500 or 600, however many representatives there are. We got a handful, and we really got to, promote these people, give them all the support we can, because they're the only ones who actually represent the American people and putting America first. And that was supposed to be the whole thing, America first, America first. Like that is what we're supposed to represent because we are America. Why would we put another country first instead of in front of our own? Why are we not putting our self-interest and our own interests in the front? It's like that's what they're there for, is to take care of our interests and protect our rights and protect our freedoms and make sure that our future is secure and that our children can afford a home and health care and food for that matter. Everything is getting really ugly when it comes to the inflation, the debt, and the global kind of chaos that's being sown. We really got to take this just seriously at this point. You look at China, and China is just lapping us at this point. They're lapping us, and they may not have GDP yet, but everything's inflated here. So it's like, and you can't even take it seriously because we have the petrodollar. But as soon as the petrodollar's gone, the dollar's done. It's collapsing. So I really think that we need to focus on ourselves and build our roads, build our bridges, build more buildings, build more houses, and have more doctors, have more welders and electricians and plumbers and all these things that we need to build. It's like we're kind of losing all that, So I just hope that we are able to somehow come out on top of this. It just doesn't look like that's happening right now, and I think we kind of have to panic a little bit and be like, okay, it's time to put all this foreign money on the wayside, all these foreign interests on the wayside. We can't be sitting here funding Israel. We can't be sitting here funding half of Africa. We can't be sitting here just wasting money on illegal immigrants and people who don't even pay taxes and weren't even from here. All this shit is ridiculous, and we've got to get our head out of our ass, really. So Netflix, there's a backlash on them over a transgender cartoon, and Elon Musk, called for a boycott. They've apparently lost $15 billion in market cap, which that's their stock or whatever. Their stock is plummeted, and people are calling for boycotts, as I just said. But like, I'm sitting here thinking, who even has Netflix anymore? I haven't watched anything on Netflix in years, but I just bootleg anything that's interesting or decent to watch on it. I like that Blue-Eyed Samurai show. I think that's the last thing from Netflix that I watched that was good, and they haven't put out season 2 yet, so I haven't even watched that. So looks like Netflix is falling to the wayside and going broke because they went woke. That's the phrase: you go woke, you go broke. Looks like that's what's happening to Netflix. So that's the news, latest development on that. And then I saw that Steven Crowder, who is the OG, the original person to go to college campuses, do the change my mind situation. He would set up a booth. He would just talk to college students. But after the Charlie Kirk assassination, he really said, like, to do this and it not be dangerous, you kind of have to go all out on security. Well, it looks like he did. He had bulletproof glass. He had bulletproof vest. He had like an army of security around him. And from what I can tell and what I've heard, it went great. It seems like he had a lot of support from the students there. It seems like it was a very popular and successful event. And I'm happy to see that. I'm happy to see that people aren't bowing to fear and people aren't, cowering to the mob. I just hope that, we see more of that. And there's bravery still in the world and people who are willing to put themselves at risk just to speak the truth, And, I don't agree with Steven Crowder on everything, but he's kind of obnoxious sometimes. But it is good to see that people are standing up and willing to speak. Even, in the face of death, possible death at this point. So, it's sad that that's necessary to do all those security conditions and whatnot, but, it's obviously it obviously is necessary because we saw the Kirk assassination and that was a horrible thing, which I'll make some comments on that. I see a lot of people attacking Candace Owens, and as I've said, like, she's the only one trying to get to the bottom of this. The people of Turning Point are just talking bad about her. They're not really answering these simple, easily verifiable questions about, was he wearing a vest? Was there an autopsy? What did the footage look like behind him? Was he turning against Israel in the days leading up to, or at least the Israeli government? Was he going to shift Turning Point's platform away from that? There's a lot of accusations and questions that are being made, and they're just kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, oh, you're just bullying us, which is ridiculous. Not only that, they're sitting here saying, oh, you're accusing us of having to do with Charlie's murder. It's like, I haven't heard anybody outright say that, but I have seen people like ask questions like, why the hell are y'all not even talking about it? Why the hell are y'all not even trying to question, the FBI narrative, which obviously looks like bullshit at this point. I'm not saying it's true or false, but it's just like, it looks bad. It looks like it's bullshit. And then there's videos coming out that he was driving around a parking lot afterwards. I think that happened yesterday. And then we're sitting here seeing, pictures of him at a gas station the next morning. All of these things are not coming from the FBI. They're coming from people like Candace Owens and Ryan Matta and just people on the internet who are just trying to figure shit out. And you would think that the people around Charlie, people who were closest to Charlie, people, who really got paid and led his organization, would use their resources, time, and minds to try to answer these questions themselves, or even be asking them in the first place. And they don't seem to have any interest, which is very disturbing to me. I think that's very suspicious, and it is bizarre. It's bizarre for them to act in such a way, and it's completely inappropriate when Candace Owens is being smeared for just trying to find the truth. And it's like, sometimes she might be on track, sometimes she might not. You can argue that back and forth, but I don't think anybody can argue that she's actually trying to figure it out, and she's actually made some progress in that and actually exposed the FBI for lying about a lot of these things. Now we're reportedly hearing that there was a girl with him on the campus, potentially, or like when he hid the gun. Like, none of these facts and details are coming from the FBI. So you got to wonder why. So I really think Candace Owens should be head of the FBI at this point, because her investigative skills are, second to none. It's amazing what she's been able to uncover and come up with. And I just think all these people talking shit about her can fuck off. Like, I mean, they can fuck straight off. And that goes for Fuentes, that goes for the Groypers, that goes for Turning Point, that goes for the leftists. All these people trying to smear her. It's just like, at this point, she's the only one trying. And, if she's wrong, then so be it. But it's like, at least she's trying. At least she's asked these questions. I saw the redheaded libertarian, talking about her. It's just like, all these people need to fuck off. And or at least, if you're not going to help, get the fuck out of the way, Get out of the way if you're not going to help. Because this is, as I've said before, a string that can unravel the whole cloth of secrecy and, the cover-up of what our government lies to us about. Same thing with Epstein files. I think that could be a string that unravels it all too. And we cannot let these things go. The things that just do not add up. It's like, they used to be able to bullshit way more back in the day. There wasn't all these surveillance cameras and ring cameras and internet sleuths communicating and sharing videos. And, I hopped on X Spaces last night, which is just like a town hall where you just have people talking about things and kind of putting their own view into it. It's like, none of these things existed. And that's, it goes back to why we have to make sure that X doesn't end up like a censored, controlled platform that we can't even speak our minds on. The last thing I'm going to talk about today is there are protests and tensions in Portland, Oregon. Trump is calling for National Guard to go and protect the ICE facilities, the immigration control and enforcement agencies. There's been arrests made. Reporter Nick Sorter, I think I said that right, was arrested last night for taking a burning flag out of somebody's hands and putting out the burning flag. So, I will say, somebody's personal property, they can burn the flag if they want. He put it on the ground and stomped it out. It's not really the right way. It's not really the code of how you're supposed to handle a flag. But the idea that he was arrested is pretty ridiculous. They could have given him a fine. And, he says he's suing or whatever. But it's like, obviously, the leftist protesters that are the problem, and the ones that are inciting and provoking and throwing pain on people and threatening people. They have snipers on the roofs around the ICE facilities, shining lasers on people to scare people away, and it works, obviously. But it's just getting really tense down there. And you're seeing, like, as soon as like a protester gets arrested, I saw one that was like sitting there shaking, and it's like these people are cowards. They're, covering their faces. They're only comfortable in a group. And Portland has really, fallen to the wayside for several years now. I've heard horrible things about Portland, honestly. Just huge homeless population, a lot of communist sentiments there, a lot of trash, a lot of drugs, and the really bad drugs, the fentanyl and the fucking crack and the meth. You see a lot of that open in public. There's a lot of releasing criminals back on the streets that are violent criminals. That's become a huge issue when it comes to the Ariana Zaruska and Laken Riley and all these other people who their killers were arrested and charged with a crime at one point, and then they get released and then they do something worse. So these places really got to get their shit together. I don't know if deploying the National Guard or whatever is ideal or what we want, but we definitely want peace and order. We want people to be safe. We want private property protected, and we want people's ability to walk safely and freely through our cities to be protected. So say what you will about ICE. They're doing a dirty, necessary job. Like at the height of the Biden administration's complicity with all these people flooding into the country, there was 250,000 people a month. And as far as I know, there hasn't even been that many people deported yet at all. So it's like we're not even close to 1 month worth of traffic that came in that have been deported out, And if we have, it's like we have much more to go. Like I can't remember the number. It was like 5 million people or something in the last 4 years came into this country, and we don't know who they are. We don't know what they're capable of. We don't know what kind of past they had, and it's completely crippling our social services, completely crippling our hospitals and our education systems, and entire apartments have been taken over. Entire sections of cities have been taken over, and when you really consider that, it really comes off as an invasion. They're using the Alien Enemies Act, to deport them. I go back and forth of whether I think it's justified or not, but it's a slippery slope, But I just think, we got to do whatever we can to make sure that we don't get replaced by people who aren't even from here and have sketchy pasts and have violent tendencies. And if people are getting arrested and detained and, prosecuted for violent, horrific acts against United States citizens, we cannot be releasing them back onto the streets. This should be common sense. I don't know. It's just scary, sometimes. Last thing I want to talk about is the Hamas response to Donald Trump's proposal. He kind of did this proposal with Netanyahu, and he's just like, oh, this is the last chance for Hamas. If you want to, not die, then you kind of have to do this. And they made a response today, and they essentially said that they agreed to almost everything, but they didn't agree. They wanted to talk about, the disarming and everything. And I think I don't remember if I talked about this today or not. Regardless, I'll talk about it again. The idea of disarming yourself in this country is, a dead on arrival proposal. Like we would never consider that for the most part because of our country's history, the fact that we were founded in a rebellion against a, empire, the British Empire. And the only way we were able to do that is to have the right to keep and bear arms. So these people are, completely controlled by the Israeli government for decades now, and the only kind of thing they can do to resist is, with their weapons. So obviously they haven't always been smart and tactical about that. October 7th was terrible. It was not, a good thing that they murdered and took innocent people hostage. However, they do have legitimate complaints. They do have legitimate concerns and reasons to resist foreign occupation. And unless Israel is going to disarm, I don't think they should either. However, I think they do want to, release the hostages and kind of stop giving Israel an excuse to kill them, which has been the excuse the entire time. Israel has just been like, oh, give us the hostages then, give us the hostages then. All the Zio bots are sitting here repeating that statement. Give us the hostages. So if they do give up all the hostages, at that point it'll be like, okay, well, why are you still fucking killing these children, right? And again, I may have talked about this earlier. I don't know. An hour show, you may repeat yourself sometimes, but regardless, I mean, it seems to be positive development. They seem to be okay with somebody else taking over Gaza. It seems like they accepted most of the terms, and the hostages were Israel's priority, allegedly, right? So that's what's got to happen, and I think that's a positive development. I think Netanyahu's kind of like trying to play Trump and be like, oh, if Trump doesn't already know and isn't in on it, but he's trying to be like, oh yeah, we'll agree to it, and then he's telling his citizens in his country something completely different. So I certainly understand the skepticism. Israel's broken almost every ceasefire they've ever had, and they're brutal. They're very brutal in their war tactics and relentless and heartless in many ways. Every time I talk about this, I get kind of emotional because it's just like there's always more videos, images of children being hurt and killed, and they're screaming in pain, or they're watching their parents die, and it's just like when you see things like that all the time, it's just like this has got to stop one way or the other, So I think it's a positive development. I hope it really equals peace, because otherwise it's just going to get worse and worse, and World War III is not that far away. It seems like this is kind of a setup for that, and what comes next is martial law, economic collapse, technocratic surveillance state, the elimination of the Constitution, all that horrible things that could just easily happen. And I think we really have to fight back against that, because there's a war in America, and this is war in America. I'm Jonathan Warren, reminding you, live free, keep fighting. Thank you.